Hi, so here we are, ready for part two of The Miller's Tale. Okay, so we hardly had even gotten started with the actual tale itself. We spent most of part one talking all about the setup, which of course is very, very important. Now, the tale, of course, as I said, begins with this idea of a triangle right from the start, right? The older husband, John, who's a carpenter. The young wife, Allison, and she is young. She's 18. And the clerk named Nicholas. Now, the clerk is actually, that's basically what you call a student. In those days, of course, universities had been created largely in the Middle Ages. They were created to prepare or educate people for roles in the church, right? So cleric, right? But don't be confused. Nicholas is not a priest. He's not an official member of the church, but he is a student, okay? Now, the narrator, who is, of course, our wonderful Miller, who, of course, is also being talked through by Chaucer, is a character, the narrator, Chaucer. And he says, basically, right from the beginning, he knew not Caton, for his wit was rude. Caton being Cato, the idea that the wisdom of ages is that like should marry like. And you get into trouble when you get two people who are not alike very well. And of course, in this case, we're talking about age, right? Huge age difference. And this is going to be trouble. So the wife, as I said, she's 18, and I mean, this is just the way Chaucer portrays it, okay? So don't go getting mad at me, but he basically talks at her as like a young colt, right? She's just bounding with energy, right? Sexual and otherwise, right? And so it's not hard to see how she is not at all, shall we say, satisfied by her husband. Line 161, and there's this great little couplet here. He's talking about her, right? For any lord to leggen in his bed, yet for any good yeoman to wed. So in other words, she's the kind of woman that any lord, meaning a noble, would want to go to bed with, and any yeoman, a worker, would wed. Right? But you see the difference. The nobles aren't going to marry a woman like this. They're going to bed her, but they're not going to marry her. Now, sire, excuse me, let's go with the Middle English. Now, sire and after sire, so befell the cause, that on the day of this Hunden Nicholas, filled with his younger wife to Raja and Playa, while that her husband was at Oceanea, as clerkes been full settled and frequent, and privily he caught her by the quinta. Now, the footnote gives us a bit of a definition, but let's just be frank about it. This is the kind of word that we do not utter in polite society. And it does refer to a certain part of the female anatomy. And he basically grabs her there. Boom. But there's nothing subtle about Nicholas. Here's the thing. And I think this is really important as we go through the Miller's Tale. Nicholas is what we might call the bad boy, right? He's wearing a black leather jacket. He's riding a Harley, right? He is not sweet. He is not tender. He is not going through all the machinations of courtship. He just is like, going, and is like, I want you. And he basically says, I have to have you, I'm going to die. And she says, no, I'm married to a better man than you. But he keeps on begging and begging, and in this very rare case, the begging actually works. Now what happens is, of course, is she says, we'll have to do it later. It's like, why wait? Well, you don't have a story if they don't wait. But okay, so you're going to have to live with that, right? We have to figure out a way. We have to figure out a way that we can be together and my husband will not have any suspicion, right? Because he's a very jealous man, and I don't want him to be suspicious of us. And he says, line 190, Nay, therefore care ye not, quoth Nicholas, don't care, don't worry about it. A clerk had a literary beset his while, if he could, a carpenter beguile. A clerk has been wasting his time, a student has been wasting his time if he can't trick a carpenter. Now what we have here is a low class conflict, right? You've got the well-educated Nicholas, who is saying, I can get over on an educated man, right? I've been wasting my time, here at Oxford if I can't figure out a way to trick a carpenter. Since, of course, you go to college and take things like adultery 101 and stuff like that, right? The point is about the social conflict, right? Nicholas sees himself as better than John. He sees himself as better than John because of his education, right? And so he thinks John's an idiot. He's ignorant. And he should be able to figure, Nicholas, should be able to figure something out so he can get together with Allison. Now, I said this is a 3+1. Now, the +1, what makes it interesting is instead of just simply having the triangle of older man, younger man, wife as the prize, what we have is a second younger man. And this is a guy named Absalom. All right, so I call him the +1. Now, Absalom is also very interested in Allison. But he's different from Nicholas. Now, put aside for the fact that he's chasing after a married woman, he is otherwise what you might call a bit of a dandy. Right? In other words, he's very into his looks. He's very into appearances, and there was one interesting line. It is line 229 and 230. But sooth to say it, he was somewhat squeamish of farting and of speech dangerous. Now, farting, believe it or not, does not need to be translated. That's farting in 2022, and it's farting in the 14th century. Okay, same thing, same word, same meaning. Now, the question is, why does this matter? Well, there's two reasons. First of all, it's a gun on the wall, as Chekhov would talk about, right? You put something out there, you're going to have to deal with it later. Something's got to happen. But it also is, showing part of the contrast between Absalom and Nicholas. Nicholas is, as I said, the bad boy, right? And while I wouldn't call Absalom the good boy, he's kind of the pretty boy, right? As I said, he's the dandy. And so he is not really comfortable with these kind of physical things like farting, right? He wants to seduce Allison in the old school way. You take your guitar under the window, you sing songs to her, and he does that. And it drives both Allison and John nuts. Because, again, she is already married. What Allison hereto not Absalom, enchanteth thus under our bowers wall? And she answered her husband therewithal, Yes, God would John, I hear it every deal. Yes, I hear it very well. Right? She's not impressed. What Absalom does not excite her. Now, Nicholas gets involved in a very, very difficult and complicated scenario. What he decides to do, basically, what he does is he goes into a fake trance. He's in there for like a long time. And eventually he comes out and says something. Now, I have to backtrack just a second a bit and talk about astrology. Not astronomy, astrology. Now, most people nowadays don't take astrology very seriously. But it had more legitimacy back in the 14th century, pardon me. And while it wasn't, totally believed, there was something going on with that. And so he says, what? So Nicholas goes into a trance, and then he says, when he comes out of the trance, I'm kind of skipping a little bit, that he has realized through his study of the stars, the astrology, right, that there is going to be another flood, even worse than Noah's flood. It's going to wipe out all earth, right, all land, all the life on land. Now, here's the catch. In the Old Testament, and I know that you may be familiar with the Noah story, even if you've never read the Old Testament, but the Old Testament, you may not be familiar with this aspect of the Noah story. After the flood is over, basically God makes a promise that he will never flood the earth again. I mean, he'll flood places, but he's not going to flood the whole earth ever again. This is in Genesis chapter 8, verse 11, just to be sure. Everybody knew this. All of Chaucer's audience would know this. John the Carpenter does not. And this is where the trick is. Right? This is where the ignorance is. Everybody hearing this tale would laugh at John for believing the one thing that God said he would not do. Right? So when Nicholas says there's going to be another flood and John believes it, that's where you look at him as a doofus, an ignorant person that Nicholas is going to embarrass and make a cuckold. Okay. So he tells them we got to get into these buckets. We're going to hang buckets from the wall. We'll wait till the rain comes, and we'll knock a hole in the roof, and we'll sail off together in the buckets. We'll be saved. But everybody's got to be in their own bucket. Allison and John have to be in separate buckets. And, so John builds the buckets. Right? Now, just to kind of accelerate to the crucial moment, they get in the buckets that night. John passes out because he's exhausted from all that work. Allison and Nicholas come down out of the buckets, jump into bed, start having sex. Right? Absalom, however, comes by because he hasn't seen John all day, thinks maybe he's away. He comes to the window and asks for a kiss. Allison basically sticks her behind out the window. Remember, it's very, very dark, no street lights or anything like that. And he kisses her on the rear. Let's just put it this way. Very funny. As he says, he felt a thing all rough and long-haired and said, "Alas, what have I do?" "Tee-hee," quoth she, and clapped the window to, and Absalom goeth forth a sorry pass. So he basically is really upset and embarrassed. So he goes to a blacksmith friend of his, gets a red-hot poker, comes back to the window. And here's the best part. He comes up, wants another kiss. This time Nicholas puts his butt outside. He lets loose a fart right at the same time that Absalom hits him with the red-hot poker, and all chaos ensues. Screaming, yelling, water, water, water. And John comes crashing to the floor.